Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching India Tonight with me, Sumita Karir, and tonight we dive into a heated topic that's making waves globally. Is the United States President Trump acting like a petulant child in his approach to India? And what's the best strategy for New Delhi to navigate this stormy diplomatic landscape and phase? Well, recent headlines paint a picture of escalating tensions. President Trump has slapped a 25%, rather an elevated 25% tariff on Indian goods, with an additional penalty for India's continued purchase of Russian energy. Now it has been bumped up to a staggering 50%. He's called India's economy, quote-unquote, dead. In fact, experts have accused Trump of targeting India unfairly while letting larger Russian oil importers like China and the European Union off the hook. Social media users are calling Trump's actions inconsistent and accusing him of bullying India to appease his MAGA base. So the question is Donald Trump behaving like a petulant kid? The characterization, remember, that stems from his erratic rhetoric and abrupt policy shifts. From threatening tariffs, publicly humiliating allies, his approach has been described as chaotic and transactional. Critics argue this unpredictability, coupled with his focus on easier targets like India, that reflects a lack of diplomatic maturity. But let's look at the other side. While Trump's supporters see these moves as strategic, perhaps a way of projecting strength and protecting American interests, they argue that his tariffs are a calculated push to force India to open its markets. And this hardline stance risks alienating a key strategic partner, with India's Ministry of External Affairs calling these tariffs unjustified and unreasonable. So what's India's best strategy? Well, Trump's history of flip-flopping does suggest that these threats may soften with negotiation. For India, diversifying trade partners through deals like the recent UK Free Trade Agreement can actually reduce reliance on the US market. But fact of the matter today, ladies and gentlemen, is that the US-India relationship, built over decades, is turning sour. And it's too vital a relationship to be derailed by one leader's outbursts. But what does the path ahead look like for India-US ties? What's the best strategy to deal with Trump 2.0? We bring you an expert analysis on all that it means for India-US ties going forward, and of course for trade and geopolitics. And joining me to discuss more on this is Jonah Blank, American author and journalist. Thank you very much, Mr. Blank, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now.
Thank you for having me.
My first question to you is essentially about decoding Trump. From imposing tariffs to now ruling out trade talks with India, is this calculated chaos or Trump just foot stomping on the global stage, perhaps just to get his way?
Well, as for everything with Trump, there is no strategy here. There is no brilliant three-dimensional chess. It's just his own personal whim, his own personal childish temper tantrum. India stood up to him. India did not cave the way so many nations have, and he hates that.
Right, Mr. Blank, but we've seen past presidents as well. They have respected boundaries, when all's not going well. So whether it is Clinton or Obama, all of them have dealt with bad news around unemployment, and of course some policies have not gone in their stride, but they've dealt with that. But here you have Mr. Trump, well, he just fires or threatens, whether it's domestically or internationally. So why does Donald Trump act like a grumpy kid just because he didn't get the candy of his choice?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right. And this is something we in America are dealing with every day. Donald Trump is fundamentally different from every prior American president. We don't really need or are able to delve deeply into his very twisted psyche to know that his decision-making process is not a rational one. It's based purely on personal whim, personal vengeance, personal, really childish, I want this, therefore I'm going to make everybody else suffer for it. I think when we put too much thought into trying to figure out a deep strategy, we're really missing the big point. This is a man who doesn't understand economics, who doesn't understand diplomacy, who doesn't understand governance, but is the most powerful individual on the planet.
Right, Mr. Jonah, in fact, I'll come back to you in just a bit. But during a briefing in the Oval Office, Donald Trump stated that he's not rethinking tariffs against India until they get it resolved. He also expressed his disappointment against Russia. Let's listen into what Donald Trump said, and then we'll continue this conversation.
Trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff.
No, not until we get it resolved.
Mr. President, is your deadline for Vladimir Putin agreeing to a ceasefire still stand tomorrow? Or is that fluid now that talks are...
Say it, what?
Is your deadline still standing for Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire tomorrow, or is that fluid now?
It's going to be up to him. We're going to see what he has to say. It's going to be up to him. Very disappointed.
Mr. Blank, I mean, Donald Trump is stating that nothing is happening under, negotiations are final or until something is worked out, perhaps according to his wishes and whims and fancies, rather. But we are given to understand from government sources that these negotiations are very much on. So why would he lie on a public platform when the whole world is listening? That does impact his credibility and puts a huge dent on it.
Donald Trump has no credibility. He lies every day of his life. One of his superpowers is simply his utter shamelessness. He tells lies with the cameras running, and it becomes very difficult to rebut them because normal people are not accustomed to being lied straight to their face again and again and again. We have to remember this has nothing to do with Russia. This has nothing to do with oil. Donald Trump has been the foremost advocate of Vladimir Putin on the world stage, not only during his current presidency, not only during his interim, not only during his early presidency, but for 20 years before that. His claim that he's truly angry about India purchasing Russian oil is simply false. And it just takes us down a rabbit hole if we treat it as truth.
Right, Mr. Blank, and I'll draw an analogy from a lot of toxic relationships where the blame is always thrown on one person, and it is by the other person. You didn't do enough, you were not loyal enough. Do you think this is essentially what Donald Trump is doing here with India? Is he trying to completely shift the blame to justify something completely irrational? Does he not understand that, diplomatic ties have to be win-win?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Donald Trump does not understand a relationship. A relationship means compromise. It means fostering, nurturing. That's true whether one is talking about a friendship, a marriage, or an international partnership. Donald Trump doesn't get that. He doesn't get that a relationship can be win-win. In his view of the world, every relationship has one winner and one loser. And that's how he treats his personal life, all three of his marriages. That's how he treats his business relationships. That's how he treats his political relationships. And that's how he treats international relationships.
And perhaps that also explains why, with China, he's chosen to completely deal with in a different manner, but he's chosen to single out India. And that is in stark contrast to what we saw a couple of years back, where, Trump's bromance with India was completely on display for everybody to see, and how, the hugs were done, and of course, how highly he was speaking of India and its leader. But now it's a completely different story. It's gone sour, and he's completely acting like a jilted lover. But why has he decided to behave differently with China? Is it just about getting a leverage over Trump?
One of the things to understand about Trump is that he does not respect weakness. He respects strength to the extent that he respects anything. Which world leaders has he had the best relationships with? They've been Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping of China, and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He likes dealing with dictators. He likes dealing with people he considers to be strong leaders. He does not respect a democratically elected and democratically accountable leader. That's why the only nation on earth that has a tariff rate as high as that he's slapped on India, at least among large nations, is Brazil. And the reason he did it is because Brazil has held its former president, who tried to stage a coup d'etat, legally accountable. Trump said, if you put Bolsonaro on trial, I'm going to slap you with 50% tariffs. That has absolutely nothing to do with economics. It's illegal under US law, but that's the kind of leader he likes.
Right, and how is that justified to Americans, given the fact that he came on the back of a massive campaign around making America great again, and of course reducing the cost of essentials for Americans, and of course, bringing in all the manufacturing. But, his policies seem to be having the completely opposite effect of what he intended.
Correct. His entire economic theory is 100% false. You can ask 100 economists, and if they're telling you the truth, they will say tariffs are a tax on Americans or on whatever country it is that is imposing the tax. They're an import tax. They make things more expensive for the country that is imposing them. So his economic policy has made prices higher for Americans and will make prices higher for Americans. That's just an economic truth. But Donald Trump is not interested in economic truth. His superpower is telling bold lies and gaslighting people to try to make them believe that they should trust him rather than what they're seeing with their own eyes.
Right, and remains to be seen how that gaslighting, starts to get starts to get unraveled soon, at least in the eyes of Americans, Mr. Jonah. That remains to be seen. But talking about how nations have reacted, let's also look at the reaction of EU, Japan, Pakistan, Vietnam, Philippines, which all seem to have buckled under Trump's pressure around tariffs. So, come to think of it, did these nations know that perhaps the best way to deal with Donald Trump is the fact that you just wait for the storm to pass, because anyway, these tariffs are not legally binding?
That certainly seems to be their calculation. Let's take the EU in particular, because the EU has more power than any of these other groups. The EU is the largest trading bloc in the world. It could have stood up to him if they had decided they wanted to fight this out. Instead, the decision they made was, let's humor him, let's humiliate ourselves and make a deal for 15% rather than having him impose 25%, 30%, or 50% on us. To be clear, none of those high rates would have stood for the EU because the US would not have been able to afford it. However, the EU decided, let him have his victory, we will publicly abase ourselves. India made a different decision because India has always, ever since independence, Indian leaders have prioritized national dignity over a percentage point of tariffs. Whether that's a good decision or a bad decision economically, it definitely is expressing what the Indian people want, because every past Indian leader, BJP, Congress, Janata Dal, whatever it may have been, has adopted a similar protection of national dignity. And I think, as a longtime observer of India, that any leader who went against national dignity would be punished by the electorate.
Absolutely, Mr. Jonah, you read that sentiment absolutely right, and which is why there is an anti-Trump sentiment at the moment in India. There are hopes that it will get resolved soon. So that is the big question, because these tirades are happening almost on an everyday basis. What will bring an end to this phase of Trump acting like an entitled, jilted lover, and for how long do you think he will keep swiping left on India?
Oh, nothing will ever change Trump's behavior. Trump is exactly the same person today that he has been throughout his entire life. He has always been an overprivileged multimillionaire. He always will act the way he acts now. However, he goes back and forth on an almost daily basis. He will be obsessed tomorrow with a different country. He has no lasting friends or enemies. All he has are baseless prejudices. So does he truly hate India? No, not really. He just has no respect for any national leader or any nation that doesn't bow before him, and even those that do bow before him don't earn his respect.
Right. You pointed out that Trump has actually no idea of what really a relationship actually means, but many still have expressed confidence in him. So what does that really say about how charisma can sometimes override character on a world stage? Or is that the case specifically related to him?
It's interesting that India is one of the only countries in the world, up until this recent set to, where Trump had a narrowly positive approval rating. There was a poll taken over the course of 4 months, the first 4 months of Trump's second term, of 23 nations asking people whether they trusted Donald Trump to do the right thing for the world. In almost every nation, overwhelming majorities, something like 80%, 90% in some countries, said no, absolutely not. Only 5 countries, India, Israel, Nigeria, Kenya, and Hungary, gave him positive ratings. And India, it was very narrow. It was about 52%. I suspect if that same poll were held tomorrow, it would be a very different outcome. The important thing here is that India had good feelings for Trump based on Modi and Namaste Trump and a number of other things that are a little more dark. Some of Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric held some attraction for some parts of the Indian electorate. What none of this really understood was that Trump was never a friend to India and never will be. He's not a friend to anyone. He only goes on the basis of his own personal interests. That's how it always has been. That's how it always will be.
Right, Mr. Blank, but what about President Putin? He's been a consistent advocate of the president, and only now he's outraged just because India did some energy trade, which the United States only encouraged in the previous administration. So what defines his relationship with President Putin?
That's one of the big mysteries of Donald Trump. There are some analysts who feel, in fact, many analysts who feel, that Vladimir Putin has blackmail material on Trump. We don't have hard evidence for it, and personally, I don't think the blackmail theory adequately explains the degree to which Trump doesn't necessarily seem afraid of Putin, but really wants his friendship, really wants to be his best buddy. So I think there's something different, something more deeply psychological about him having this fondness for authoritarian dictatorial figures. But all of that, really, from an Indian standpoint, is irrelevant because Trump does not care about standing up to Russia. He's momentarily annoyed that Putin is not giving him an easy victory by agreeing to some deal over Ukraine. He doesn't understand that Vladimir Putin is not interested in a deal over Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is interested in taking over Ukraine. So Trump is annoyed at that Putin is not giving him an easy victory, but he still has far greater respect for Putin than perhaps any other national leader.
Right. And what would you say of world leaders who think that, Donald Trump shares their worldview? Does he have an ideology, and are they misreading him?
They are, if they think that Donald Trump has an ideology, they're definitely misreading him. Donald Trump has no ideology. His whole history has been one of looking out purely for Donald Trump. He has in the past identified as a Democrat, an independent, as a traditional Republican, and now as a MAGA Republican. But his only ideology has ever been what's best for Donald Trump. He does not have any attachment to good ideas or bad ideas. The only ideas he's even capable of comprehending are those of his own personal self-interest.
Right. Mr. Blank, let's also draw some parallels with, former US President Nixon. How would you compare the strategies of Nixon and the way he looked at India versus how President Donald Trump looks at India? How would you see the two looking at India, and how does that really differ?
Well, they both were quite racist towards India. If one looks at the conversations that Nixon had with Henry Kissinger, revealed among other places by the book The Blood Telegram and others, Nixon said just horrendous things about Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and about Indians in general and Indian women in particular. Any Indian who wants to know what Nixon feels about Indians should definitely look at what he actually said. I won't even say it on air because it's so awful. Donald Trump has frequently said pretty bad things about India, and he frequently makes fun of Prime Minister Modi's accent when talking with his own aides. At a personal level, neither one of these figures had any fondness for India whatsoever. Nixon, however, had ideology, he had ideas, he was an intelligent man whom I utterly disagreed with, but he wasn't just acting on the basis of what was best for Richard Nixon. He was acting on the basis of an actual ideology that was well thought through, and he was personally a racist who adopted bad policies. Trump does not have any ideology like that. Trump is just motivated by his own prejudices and self-interest.
Absolutely, Mr. Jonah. In fact, at the moment, we're showing our viewers some visuals of 2020 when Donald Trump visited India with Melania Trump. Of course, there was a lot of celebration here in India as well. And he did like stadiums full of people actually chanting slogans for him. So did Indians really overinterpret Trump's intentions towards India?
Yes, definitely, because anyone who saw the Namaste Trump reception and thought that that meant that Trump actually liked India did not understand Donald Trump. He likes big receptions and people cheering for him. He has that every time he goes to a rally in America. And in Ahmedabad, the reception was enthusiastic, but he wasn't able to trot out all of his old and from an American standpoint, rather tedious applause lines because the Indian public doesn't know or care about his silly little obsessions with Arnold Palmer and windmills and conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton and an hour and a half more of that. So he only got applause when he said pre-canned things about the US-India relationship or what have you. The thing to remember here is that none of it actually translates to friendship or appreciation or a bigger geopolitical idea. After all, the presidents who have been popular in India, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, these are not necessarily people who spent a lot of time in India or who know it intimately. However, they are people who, from a US perspective, have looked at the relationship and said, here's a nation with which we share common values, a common democracy, a common commitment to a multicultural society. And Donald Trump believes in none of these things.
Absolutely. And as you put that into perspective, Mr. Blank, the question now is how should India deal with Donald Trump? So far, India's strategy has been to keep calm and carry on. But after a while, even parents stop dealing with an entitled, temperamental kid in a candy shop.
Well, as any parent can say, the worst thing you can do for a child having a temper tantrum is just to give them more candy. It never works, and it never is healthy for either the parent or the child. At least children grow out of that phase where they have a temper tantrum. Trump at the age of 79 is never going to grow out of this. So what should India do? It should focus on its own national interests. As a friend of India, as someone who has been living in and working in and going to India for about 40 years now. I would advocate that India continue to stand up for itself. This is what India always has done, and I think rightly so. All through the 1990s, for example, a lot of U.S. presidents, well, one U.S., two U.S. presidents, but throughout all of Indian history, U.S. presidents and foreign leaders have said that Indian prime ministers have been too prickly, too determined to stand up for the nation's dignity at the expense of their temporary economic ups and downs. Whether that's true or not economically, it certainly seems to be the approach that Indians have favored. If you ask most Indians, would you rather that we have a 25% tariff and have Prime Minister Modi publicly humiliate himself in front of Donald Trump, the way some other world leaders have, or a 50% tariff and not humiliate himself? I suspect most Indians would say, we don't want our leader to humiliate himself.
Absolutely, and India has been standing rather strong. But my final question to you, Mr. Blank, you said that he wants what he wants, but India cannot give him the candies that he exactly wants. What next then?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. Because what he wants is not for India to stop buying Russian oil, or even to agree to an extortionate deal on tariffs. What he wants is India to humiliate itself. Every single action of Donald Trump is a dominance play. Everything that he tries domestically or overseas is his attempt to bully a prospective partner. To be in this relationship, there's a winner and a loser, and I'm going to be the winner and you're going to be the loser. So the only way for India to grant that would be for India to accept being the loser in this relationship. And I don't think that's what the Indian people are willing to accept from their government.
Absolutely not, Mr. Jonah. That's never happening, given the fact that even though India is continuing those negotiations, but India bows to none. And of course, it is maintaining its dignity intact. It is refusing to open up the agri, dairy and GM crops sector to the United States, and perhaps which is what has earned it the ire of Donald Trump. It remains to be seen how soon can this relationship be on the mend, and what will be offered from the side of the United States negotiators when they arrive here in India. On that note, thank you very much for taking the time out here to talk to us here at ET Now. It was a pleasure speaking with you and getting your perspectives.
Thank you so much for having me.